There comes a time when a game studio must face the reality that the project they're working on is kind of doomed. And not doomed in the sense that they're gonna have to cancel the project and do something else instead. No. Doomed in the sense that it's going to take them with it. These are the top 7 games that killed studios. Games whose production was, well, I wouldn't say detrimental to the existence of the studio, but fundamentally incompatible with it. Games because of which studios have been shut down, people have lost jobs, dreams have been dashed, hopes have been ruined, and many people lie awake at night just thinking what would have happened if it weren't for that game. Well, not a lot of people. Maybe the people that worked at the studio and some really obsessive people on YouTube that are now talking to you. That being said, let's get it started with number 7, the Visceral Star Wars game. This is, without a doubt, the game that killed the studio. And it did so because it wasn't the right kind of game according to Electronic Arts and according to some of the people that worked on the project. This was going to be a story-focused linear action game. Now, having a single-player story-based game isn't bad. Those things can sell absolutely like mad. I mean, just look at Zelda Breath of the Wild or The Witcher 3, but this was going to be a more linear affair. And apparently that would not have sold well, even though some of the people working on the project are kind of famous for working on other linear action games in the past and them selling like mad, you know, Uncharted. But it probably didn't do all that well in the estimations that Electronic Arts' marketing and sales department did, so they canned it. And along with it, the entire studio, because hey, why not? I mean, it's not like they could sell pretty much a lump of manure if they just stamped the Star Wars logo on it and said, hey, this one doesn't have loot boxes. It's not like that would have sold millions. Well, it is. I mean, it would have sold, because that's what these games do. That's what the IP does. But this was Electronic Arts we were dealing with, so there wasn't really all that much to be done. Speaking of which, number 6, Mass Effect Andromeda. Another recent incident where a game launched, this time, managed to destroy the studio that created it. Now, to be fair, I was sort of debating where to put BioWare Montreal here, because the studio technically isn't dead, it just doesn't exist as its own studio anymore. It was absorbed into EA Motive, so it was more of a situation of it being eaten alive. But I'm gonna put it here just in case. Now, Mass Effect Andromeda had a couple of, how shall I put this, bets riding on it. The bet that it would make people forget that Mass Effect 3 sort of bumfunked the entire franchise worse than 2 did, and it would sell well enough to spark the rise of another trilogy, of another badly linked together Mass Effect games that were their own thing, independent from what the original BioWare did. None of those bets paid off. The game didn't sell amazingly well, people didn't love it, so there wasn't much of a reason to keep the team that worked on it together in the same composition, because it was obvious they didn't make a winner. Also, I think they outsourced the graphics to Electronic Arts Romania, the animation, some of them at least. And it's not that they did a bad job, it's that Electronic Arts tends to not give studios time or money. Why would they? It's Mass Effect, it's gonna sell anyway, right? Nope. And so BioWare Montreal went the way of the dodo, in the sense that it was probably eaten by something bigger. Number 5, DAIKATANA. The year was 2000. 18 years ago. Oh, it seems so far away. There was a promising game on the horizon. A game created by one of the designers of Doom, of Quake, John Carmack's baby. This was a game built by a studio founded on the principle of design is king. This was gonna be kick-ass. This was gonna be the most amazing game ever. This was a costly studio to run, because they sort of went insane with the budgets on everything and made stupid decisions. Though they did also set up Iron Storm Austin, which was working on Deus Ex, and even Dallas itself was making a Necronox, so it wasn't all wasted. But when DAIKATANA came out and all those checks they've been wanting to cash on the game bounced on account of it not being good, and that thing with the marketing campaign being awful, well, when that that happened, Iron Storm Dallas folded. Now this hurts me a lot more than maybe it hurts other people, because Iron Storm Dallas, as I've said, made Anachronox. It was in development at the same time as DAIKATANA. Well, it was in development for less time because DAIKATANA was repeatedly pushed back and back and back and back until it was just sort of released without it actually being technically finished, if you were to judge by the AI of your teammates, who needed to be in certain places to actually let you finish the game, but they'd get stuck from corners constantly. But anyway, the idea is that Anachronox was in development at Iron Storm Dallas, but because it as well was going to be delayed on account of it wasn't actually finished yet, the game was cut in half, with the expectation of Anachronox 2 coming out soon. I mean, it was gonna have a budget, right? I mean, DAIKATANA was going to sell well, the studio was gonna be fine, Anachronox would sell well as well, and the studio will be extra fine. None of them sold well. I'd say mostly because Anachronox was kind of in the shadow of DAIKATANA. It was dwarfed by it, by its failure, and so 17 years later, I'm still waiting to know how that story ends. How Anachronox is supposed to go on. I keep waiting for Tom Hall to write that book, and he hasn't. I may just ask him one day, hey, what's gonna happen next? And hope he's gonna tell me. Because odds are I won't be finding that out in a game. And all because DAIKATANA killed Iron Storm Dallas. Number 4. Halo Wars. It's a sad, sad tale of a studio that diligently developed games with zeal, with passion, with success at every turn. But one day that studio got the mission to create a different kind of game. It basically got a suicide mission. Ensemble Studios was tasked with making Halo Wars, with making an RTS game based on an FPS series, which technically started out as an RTS, but that's a whole other matter, for a console. It was an idea doomed to fail. After all, it was spearheaded by Microsoft. The company had so little faith in its own plan to make this game that 2 months before the game was done, 2 or 3 months I think, again before the game was done, they told everybody at the studio, hey guys, by the way, when you're finished with the game, you're all fired. Imagine that, imagine the impact. It doesn't matter if this game's gonna sell, it doesn't matter if you did a good job, it doesn't matter how hard you worked, you're done, we're out. Until we'll be back in again, because suddenly we realize, oh yeah, maybe making some games that aren't Halo or Gears of War is a good thing, but there's no Ensemble Studios now to make Age of Empires 4, is there? And they did launch Halo Wars 2, made in part actually by the Creative Assembly, which honestly I have no idea what it was about. I think it was released on Windows 2, but it sort of went poof and nobody cares about it. Sort of like what Microsoft did to Ensemble Studios. Number 3. Battlefront 3. No, DICE wasn't shut down by Electronic Arts yesterday. I'm referring to the original Battlefront 3, the one developed by Free Radical. This game was in the works a long time ago when LucasArts didn't have its head shoved up its keister, and it was shaping up to be oh so very interesting. You know how in the newer Battlefront games you spawn in a vehicle, and in the first one you didn't have any space battles? Well, on this one you could get into you would walk on foot and then get into a vehicle, and with that vehicle you could participate in combat on the ground, in the air, and in space in the same map. That was Battlefront 3 10 years ago. Even though today's Battlefront games use vastly superior technology with hardware 10 times as powerful, they're not even close to making that. But Free Radical, that's what the studio was working on. That's what the studio would have given to the people. But LucasArts sort of went, hey, you know what? I think we're fine. We're just gonna go over there. And they went over there, and then they were bought out by Disney. But Battlefront 3 was long dead before that. The remaining pieces of Free Radical were bought by Crytek and then dumped when Crytek realized, oh yeah, we don't actually make any good games, do we? And most of the people using our engine are really regretting using it now. A sad day it was, both because Battlefront 3 was so promising and because Free Radical was shut down because of it. Oh sure, some would say, oh, it was because Haze didn't sell. No, if If LucasArts hadn't pulled the plug on Battlefront, they would have still been around. But hey, you don't argue with the owner of an IP. Number 2, Fallout 3. I know what you're thinking. It's not Black Isle. The last game to be developed by Troika was going to be a post-apocalyptic sci-fi game that you're now seeing a prototype of on the background, and it was going to be Fallout 3. Now sure, when they started work on it, they didn't have the rights, but they tried to get the rights. Unfortunately, Bethesda got there first, and so they tried to make the post-apocalyptic game as its own thing, but they couldn't find a publisher for it. They couldn't find someone to foot the bill. And to be fair, it wasn't really an inconceivable idea that they couldn't find funding for it or support for it, because although Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines is a phenomenal game, it is trash in terms of how it was released. Buggy, incomplete, it went over budget, people worked on it day and night non-stop for way too much time for it to actually be healthy. And Arcanum itself, although it was an amazing, absolutely superb game, didn't really have the sort of support you'd think something like this would have had to be able to reach the same level of success that Fallout did in the Interplay days. They couldn't find support for it, sadly. So this was their last game, their Hail Mary. The game they were banking on in order to actually let them continue existing. So then later create Arcanum 2, where you would journey to the center of Arcanum. They were even gonna make a new Bloodlines that maybe would have been less janky. But because this game failed, because it was never finished, well, it was never out at a prototype stage actually, because of this it all crumbled, and Troika with it. But there are dreams again of it being resurrected at Obsidian one day. And number 1 is Duke Nukem Forever. Now I would love to tell you it's because Gearbox shut down, but no. Duke Nukem Forever is probably the slowest death of a studio possible. It was in development since 1997. People worked on it in one form or another for 14 years. Well, technically the people at 3D Realms worked on it for around 12 years, not 14, but still 12 years, that's a lot of time, and at the end to just be canned and fired. Well, honestly, probably the majority of them had already left the company by then, on account of it's insane to work on the same game for so many years and not actually make any progress towards something good. This was a slow and agonizing process that infuriated everybody. This was a studio death that's going to live on in memory for all generations in the history of mankind. Not only because the game itself was so long in development that it killed the studio that made it, but also because the end result was a horrible, decrepit wretch of a game. One that, had it been released in 97, would have been laughed off, well, if it had the graphics of 97, I mean, it would have been laughed off the stage at wherever games go on a stage to be laughed off of, as you get the idea. So close is the top 7 games that killed studios. This list would have been filled with more properties of Electronic Arts, but I thought I'd just snip it here and not make it an entire list of Electronic Arts studios being shut down, because let's face it, at one point you kind of have to wonder, maybe it's not the games, maybe it's EA, which it totally is. But we're not done with games ending or killing off things. We're gonna have a continuation of the idea next week, so be sure to drop by. Goodbye.